This is the only instance in this entire game that instead of saying team while referring to the group of companions and the player, it says party. Oh, look, it's almost like they went out of their way to put the word team into a fantasy RPG. There is something when you have an elven god referring to your allies as your team. Like your soccer team, your basketball team, your... What's next? Club? What I find actually the weakest part of the writing is how they put a lot of modern dialogue, modern words within a fantasy RPG. I find that you can discuss whatever you want in your game, but make it in a way that's immersive in your world. Make it a part of the general lore and the general story. Make it something that actually matters within the world so you can make a better point. How do I say this? A more lasting, memorable experience rather than just throwing mother terms at the player and making things just feel all stand out in a bad way, like in a... It just feels out of context of the grand scheme of the events in the game. Sometimes the game drops you some beautiful, mysterious lore pieces, and then there is the companions and everybody trying to chew that information down. Let people go on forums, let people go on Reddit or whatever and discuss the things themselves. You don't need to hold those discussions in the game. Felt a lot like talking down the player, like the player can't take conclusions on themselves. It felt very tutorial like telling you how to understand and how to feel about things rather than just showing you, especially because at moment if you have played all the contents of the game, some of the stuff that were chewed down to you were completely dismissing part of the lore and part of the world from before that was already discussed in the franchise, and it was simply not taken in consideration. It could be that the companions are indeed unreliable narrators, and I understand that, but at the same time, in the dialogue wheel, there was never an option for the player to disagree and say, hey guys, maybe we're taking things out of context. Maybe we just don't have all the pieces of the puzzle. We're trying to put something together here that is just incomplete. But you just don't have this ability. You basically, in a way, you just have to be part of this circle jerk about accepting something that your teammates are saying, even when you don't really believe it. I find that some areas of this game, they were so exceptionally done that it makes me really hurt that other areas couldn't pull their weight. Like, look how gorgeous this place is. I find that the environmental design, I find that the areas designs, everything when it comes to how the world looks to be excellent, to be really, really good. And that's literally everywhere you go. I haven't seen a place that felt that was lacking. Exploration also has been really fun, really engaging. I'm not personally tired of the combat, but I finally understand what people meant when they say that the combat gets old and tiring. I feel like it has a lot to do in how these skills are unlocked. I'm basically using the same somewhat skills that I used when I was level 20. It's like you don't unlock a lot of like new actual abilities and abilities like the active skills after that, you know? You can very fast reach all of these, and then after that you lose that wonder of finding out and unlocking a new skill and trying to make different skills work. I feel like this is really good, but it needed to go one step further to keep people engaging with it. Does that make sense? For example, it's fun to try other builds and other skills, but there is no way for me to save my build. There is no way for me to quickly have like different types of builds, and that hurts the game. Because the way that the game is, that enemies can have such high resistances to your damage, not being able to easily save your different builds and swap, and not rewarding people trying other builds, it limits how much you can do with it. Yes, I am free to respec and redo my points over and over again for free as many times as I want on the spot, but there is only so much that I'm willing to go through every skill and apply them, and and back and forth. At some point there are some builds that I really like. I wish I could save them, and I just can't. And I find that to really harm the game the way that they made the enemies. Because, like, for example, yesterday I was fighting a dragon that resisted ice, and I just did very, very little damage to it. I still killed it, but then imagine you arrive in the fight, it has the resistance, you only have companions that have that resistance, and then what? You're fucked. You're gonna be fighting that dragon for 3 hours. Don't you wish that after a while you could unlock at least one new skill of your specialization? Because I have been basically using the same skills that I could be using at level 20 and level 50. I feel like having one extra set of skills for each type of element would have done this game wonders. I feel like I didn't mention the things that I actually really enjoyed about the combat. So just to clarify on that, I find that executing the combos, pairing, dodging, moving around, using my companions to execute their abilities, all this felt very satisfying. It felt really nice to control my character overall, a lot nicer than it felt in Inquisition. And I feel like that adds so much to the gameplay. The only thing that the gameplay came short is literally giving you more things to unlock later down the road. Even though there are a few things that are level gated within the specializations, it doesn't feel like enough. Also, the dialogue. I think that the start of this game damaged this game's reputation so much. I find that the dialogue is at its weakest at the start, but like it's really, really, really weak at the start. It does get a bit better, and certain companions, Morrigan, Solas, and certain moments, very specific moments, they are excellent. And the thing is, seeing how the dialogue can be so good mixed with some dialogue that doesn't really compare to the good parts, and the dialogue that doesn't compare to the good parts, sadly, it happens more frequently, or at least for more prolonged periods. I would say that this was the fault of whoever was guiding the writers. It feels like whoever was leading didn't have the heart to say that somebody could have done their work in a different way that would be better for the setting of the game. Because you can give negative feedback in a kind way, but I find that whoever was in charge of this feedback, they came short. Because the parts that are excellent, they're excellent, and the parts that are weak, it feels like a rough draft that could easily be improved, but they simply didn't have the feedback to push them to improve. It's almost like it was missing somebody seeing the whole picture and making sure that the different parts that different people wrote, because that happens in every game has multiple writers, it's too much for one single person. Somebody had to oversee everything and make sure that they fit in tone, they fit in quality, they fit in the way that they express itself. Because right now the game feels like a roller coaster. I also find that the companion quests, they are way too segmented. There's too many parts of each quest, and it feels like a little bit that the game is forcing me to do certain things at certain times. That feels Like at moments, the game wants me to proceed the main story. At other moments, the game wants me to do the companion quests, and then I do another quest, and then 500 companion quests unlock. Except those quests, instead of making long in-depth quests, they have 5 mini quests that in between each quest you have to jump in and wait for information coming from god knows where, and and there is a very distinct quality in between the companion quests. Emmerich and Davrin quest lines, they felt like they had more substance to them than the other companions. The other companions, they felt like there was something missing. Like, I find that Hardling has a very compelling story for her to work with, but it feels like her quest just felt hollow. Like it was missing substance. She gets possessed, and then you fight her, and then that's kind of it, Nev's quest, oh god, to me, Nev's quest felt the most jarring by far. Those are some of the weaknesses. As we go through, I would like to talk more. Again, I also find the choices in this game to be quite hollow. There are so many little choices that you can make in the game, but at the end of the day, it feels like whenever you pick a different dialogue, it doesn't change how the events of the game or how the scene will proceed. It changes only one line directly after your response. So it's like the cutscene is set, except the one line that your character responded to, the other companion will respond back to that, and then things proceed as nothing happened. So I feel like that's why the flirting felt odd and felt like it fell flat a lot of times. It's like the cutscene, it had a way that it wanted to go, and when you change the topic from whatever the characters were saying with, let's say, a flirt, the flirt wouldn't become the focus, and then you would just go back in 2 lines, after 2 lines of dialogue, back to whatever the topic was. So it's like that never happened. So it felt like you could have conversations and decisions that just didn't lead anywhere. Also, there are many moments in the game during the companion storylines where you get to influence your companions one way or another. With the dialogue wheel, you can be more assertive, you can be more compassionate, you can express different emotions, and that should be enough to sway your companions one way or another. But I felt that it's very out of place for me to make full decisions for my companions out of nowhere. Like yesterday, I had to decide for Tash if they should follow the Quan or the Rivalni, and such decision is so personal. It depends on their experience with each culture and their mother and the adventurer and the player. Maybe how the player reacted to certain events during this adventure, and not for me to just make it for them. That was just too drastic. And not to mention that some of those decisions, they feel like big decisions, but they don't really matter. They will only change, like, for example, the type of damage that your companion will have a bonus at, or something like this. It doesn't actually alter how the story is going. And I find that in an RPG, when you give a player a choice, it's important to show what that choice gives the player back. I can't think of a single fact like this except the decision between destroying the cities. Besides the cities, there hasn't been any lasting consequences of my decisions. And I find that to be one of the strongest parts of an RPG. I find also, again, the things that are happening in this game, the overall arcing story, like what actually is going on in each quest, to be extremely interesting. But they could have explored each moment to a much deeper extent in a way that would have made the quests themselves feel even more like rewarding. Overall, I still do think that this game is fun, but I feel like now I can understand better, because one thing about me is that when people just say, "Oh, this is bad, this is awful," uh, I hear that, but I kind of try to understand, why did somebody reach that conclusion? Why does somebody feel that this specific part was so shallow? I'm literally trying to see how things interact with one another. But I felt like, since I have done the companion quest by now, I could understand the topic a little bit more. Okay, so now that I finished the game, I would like to talk about my overall thoughts on how the entire thing felt. The writing, it starts really, really poor in the beginning of the game, but it really, really improves as you go. Some parts they improve to the point that it becomes excellent, and other parts they are still at a point that feels a little bit tone deaf to the setting of the game in a way that doesn't feel very fantasy. Overall, I don't really like the vibes that the player sometimes feels like they're being talked down, and they're being fed information and fed how to think and how to feel at certain parts of the game. But at other times, in contrast, there is some pieces of dialogue and there is certain moments that feel like the opposite of that. It feels like it's back at the mystery, it's back at you being able to draw your own conclusions. So the dialogue feels, as the quality of the dialogue feels as stable as my mental health. I feel like this is something that Inquisition also suffered, that the game would be better if some things were just taken out of it. And I feel like this game, it still has some of this. But Inquisition, it kind of had that everywhere. In this game, it feels more directed at the writing of the dialogue. The ending of the game, all the dialogue there was excellent. The ending of the game, it feels like the entire thing just was so much more connected than the beginning and the middle of the game. You do not have to use things that you learn along the journey, but your decisions actually matter to the outcome of things. And it was honestly so deeply beautiful, not only visually, but the writing. Emotions were everywhere. The music, there were some music that I could recall from, like, not only previous moments in the franchise, but even from different franchises of BioWare. It was honestly a very good surprise. The ending of this game was so strong, which makes me believe that, I know that we waited 10 years for this game, but it makes me feel like the beginning and the middle were somewhat rushed, and they just didn't have the time to refine things to make it as good as the ending feel. The ending feels like they went over and over, and they tried to make it as good as possible, and they simply didn't have the same room to do it with the rest of the game. The ending of this game, I believe, to be one of the best I have seen in gaming, and it comes from the start that's so weak, the writing, and it ends in such a beautiful way. It ends so strongly. It's in a way a little bit hurtful, because imagine if the whole game was like that. It would have been such a magical experience. I think that's what I have to say about it. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, please like and subscribe. It would mean a lot. It helps me out a lot. Have fun!